While enlightenment cannot be classified in any particular doctrine or set of dogmas, science has played a leading role in Enlightenment discourse and thought. Many Enlightenment writers and thinkers had a scientific background and combined scientific progress with the overthrow of religion and traditional authority in favor of the development of freedom of expression and thought. Generally speaking, Enlightenment science highly valued empiricism and rational thinking, and was embedded in the Enlightenment ideal of progress and progress. Skepticism occupies a noteworthy place in Enlightenment philosophy, because trust in our intellectual capacity to gain a systematic knowledge of nature is a key feature of the age. Given the negative, critical, and suspicious attitude of the Enlightenment toward traditionally valid doctrines, it is not surprising that Enlightenment thinkers use skeptical tropes from the old skeptical tradition to attack traditional dogmas in science, metaphysics, and religion. However, skepticism is not just a methodological instrument in the hands of the Enlightenment thinkers. The Enlightenment also includes a general restoration and validation of the value of pleasure in human life against the tradition of Christian asceticism in the flourishing of the arts, the critique of the arts, and the philosophical theorizing of beauty, encouraged by this recovery and affirmation. The Enlightenment is also enthusiastically concerned with the discovery and unveiling of the rational order in nature, which is most clearly expressed in the development of their new science. To many theorists in the Enlightenment, it seems that the faculty of taste, the capacity by which we recognize beauty, reveals to us part of that order, an unmistakable harmony, unity in the midst of diversity. Thus, human sensibility in the phenomenon of aesthetic pleasure reveals a rational order that unites two enlightenments of the Enlightenment. For some, especially for critics of the Enlightenment, the mitigation on this point is already beyond the Enlightenment. It is certainly true that the emphasis on the individual or the particular versus the universal, found in other thinkers of the late Enlightenment, is in conflict with the doctrines of the Enlightenment. Herder, in a sense following Hamann, argues that every single object of art in its own terms must be understood as a wholly complete entity. Under the general contract model, though this is clearer in later contract theorists such as Locke and Rousseau than in Hobbes itself, political authority is not based on conquest, natural or divinely established hierarchies or obscure myths and traditions, but rather on the rational consent of the ruled. Baruch Spinoza also contributed significantly to the development of the political philosophy of the Enlightenment in his early years. The Metaphysical Doctrines of Ethics, 1677, formed the basis of his influence on the age. Liberalism is perhaps the most characteristic political philosophy of the Enlightenment, and in this text Spinoza is first and foremost one of its authors. The French Enlightenment was not a revolutionary, and many belonged to the nobility. Their ideas played an important role in undermining the legitimacy of the old regime and shaping the French Revolution. There were two different Enlightenment ideas: the Radical Enlightenment, inspired by the philosophy of Spinoza, which advocated democracy, individual freedom, freedom of expression and the elimination of religious authority. A second, more moderate version, supported by René Descartes, John Locke, Christian Wolff, Isaac Newton, and others, sought a rapprochement between reform and the traditional systems of power and faith. Much of what is contained in the scientific method, the kind of knowledge, the evidence, the experience, and the causation, and some modern attitudes to the relationship between science and religion, were developed by David Hume and Adam Smith. The Enlightenment, also known as the Age of Enlightenment, was a philosophical movement that dominated the world of ideas in Europe in the 18th century. At the center was the idea that reason is the main source of authority and legitimacy, and it championed ideals such as freedom, progress, tolerance, fraternity, constitutional government, and separation of church and state. The Enlightenment was characterized by an emphasis on the scientific method and reductionism, as well as by an increased questioning of religious orthodoxy. The ideas of the Enlightenment undermined the authority of the monarchy and the church and paved the way for the political revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries. The religious commentary from the time of the Enlightenment was a response to the last century of the religious conflict in Europe. Enlightenment thinkers sought to limit the political power of organized religion and thus prevent another era of intolerant religious warfare. A number of new ideas developed, including deism, belief in God the Creator, without reference to the Bible or any other source, and atheism. Many of the main themes and positions of contemporary philosophical ethics take shape within the Enlightenment. Before the Enlightenment in the West, ethical reflection begins and is guided by religious teachings about God and life after death, the highest good of humanity, and, accordingly, the content and the justification of moral duties are directly religious thought. During the Enlightenment, this certainly changes within philosophy, but to a large extent within the population of all Western society. Rousseau advances the cultivation and realization of human freedom as the supreme goal of man and thus expresses another side of the ethics of enlightenment. Although Rousseau attaches great importance to the freedom of man and makes essential contributions to our understanding of ourselves as free, he is not very seriously concerned with the problem of the place of human freedom in the cosmos, as it is understood in the context of the Enlightenment. Naturalism.